Hello everyone, it's Scott and we're back today and we're going to talk about the top 15 rares from Bloomburrow. So yesterday I put out my top 10 list for mythic rares, which I think are going to be the most impactful in standard, and these are the 15 rares I think will have the most impact on standard as well. And then tomorrow I'll be back for our final preview video for Bloomburrow, where I'll talk about the top 15 uncommons from the set for standard. But before we dive in, remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. What did you think was the best rare from the set? So do all those YouTube things to help get our content out to more people. So let's dive in to our list. So coming in at number 15 is Valley Might Caller. For a green mana, you get a 1/1 Frog Warrior with Trample. And whenever another frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Valley Might Caller. So this card is designed to go in a deck that's going to utilize the green creatures from Bloomburrow. And as long as you're in that, I think this is going to be a very good card. We already know that rabbits are going to be a deck in standard because we've got so many quality rabbits from this set and from before. So this could simply go into that, or it could go into a frog deck or a raccoon deck or even a squirrel deck. And I think that flexibility of it makes it a good card for standard. Coming in at number 14, we have Storm Chaser's Talent. For a blue mana, you get an enchantment that's a class, and on level 1, when Storm Chaser's Talent enters, create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. You can level it up for 3 and a blue mana to level 2, and when this class becomes level 2, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And for 5 and a blue mana, you can move it to level 3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. Now, for my money on this one, this is really about level 1. So for 1 mana, you could create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. Great rate, great ability, and it also triggers the prowess abilities of other creatures you already have on the field. And that's why this is going to go into our Is It Prowess deck, whether it's going to be otter focused or whether it's going to be a broader based prowess deck. But I think this easily goes in there, and really probably in essence is our replacement for Kumano Faces Kakuzan. Next at number 13, I've got Keen-Eyed Curator. For 2 green mana, you get a Raccoon Scout. That's a 3/3. As long as there are 4 or more card types among cards exiled with Keen-Eyed Curator, it gets +4/+4 and has Trample. And for 1 mana, you can exile target card from a graveyard. So this is a card that I think if there is a raccoon deck, I think this probably goes in that. But broadly speaking, 2 green mana is a difficult cost to pay because you're probably playing this in a multicolored deck. Our raccoon deck naturally is going to be in green and red, so you're probably going to be in a situation where you're trying to play it there. But the big thing is, this is a card that just wants to exile stuff. And because of that, you can make it a 7/7 in the mid to late game and give it trample. And I think that's good enough to see play in standard given the current environment. At number 12, we got Zoraline Cosmos Caller. For 1, a white and a black mana, you get a legendary creature that's a bat cleric and is a 3/3 with flying and vigilance. And whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain 1 life. And whenever Zoralina enters or attacks, you may pay a white and a black mana and pay 2 life. When you do, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So Zoraline, I think, is a great card for the bat deck that we're likely to see at least possibly in standard. There are enough good bats from previous sets plus those from Bloomburrow that I think there's enough to make it work. Certainly in any Orzhov deck, there's definitely enough bats to go with other things to make this work. But that ability to just attack and gain life, and then the ability to spend mana, give up 2 life, and then get something back from the graveyard that's 3 mana or less. I think those are powerful abilities in Standard. And the nice thing about Zerlina, she doesn't die to cut down, so you've got to use a true removal spell to get rid of her. And because of that, I think it's got a chance to see some serious play in Standard. All right, coming in at number 11 is Hired Claw. For a red mana, you get a Lizard Mercenary. That's a 1/2. And whenever you attack with one or more lizards, Hired Claw deals 1 damage to target opponent. And for 1 and a red mana, you can put a +1/+1 counter on Hired Claw. Activate only if an opponent lost life this turn and only once each turn. So this is, you play this on turn 1. On turn 2, you attack, you do a damage, and if the opponent doesn't have anything to block this, you probably go ahead and get it through for a damage. And if the opponent does have something to block, then you probably give it that +1/+1 counter. And now it's a 2/3 and probably is going to do well in combat for you and stay on the battlefield. And this is, I think, one of the linchpin cards to the Lizard deck that we're going to see in Standard, because this set gave us a lot of quality lizards, and we already had some other good ones in Standard. So I think we will see a lizard deck in the Rakdos colors, and that's going to give it access to lots of quality removal, which I believe is going to lead that to be a quality deck in Standard. Coming in at number 10, we have Sunspine Lynx. For 2 and 2 red mana. You get an Elemental Cat. That's a 5/4 with some very key abilities. First, players can't gain life. Second, damage cannot be prevented. And when Sunspire Lynx enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So we know we're in a format where people are using a lot of non-basic lands. So this is very easily, it comes into play, and it's going to do 3 or 4 damage, maybe more potentially, to your opponent because they are playing a lot of dual lands. And the result of that is that even if your opponent is able to kill Sunspire Lynx before it gets to attack, the result is you're doing damage to your opponent regardless, and I think that makes this good enough to play in Standard. And if you can untap with this and then attack with it, you've got a 5/4 that is probably better than anything that your opponent has on their side, or they may have to block with multiple creatures to go ahead and kill this. So I think that's enough to make this playable in red decks in Standard. Coming in at number 9, we have Valley Quest Caller. For 1 and a white mana, you get a Rabbit Warrior. That's a 2/3. And whenever one or more other rabbits, bats, birds, or mice you control enter the battlefield, you get to scry 1. And that's a nice scry ability because it's not limited to once a turn. And other rabbits, bats, birds, and mice you control get +1/+1. So this is a lord for those 4 creature types. So I can see Valley Quest Caller not only in a mice deck, but you might see it in a rabbit deck or a bat deck or even a bird deck as an enabler to raise the power and toughness of all of your creatures. And because of that, I think this is going to see some serious Standard play. Coming in at number 8, we've got Dream Dew Entrancer. For 2, a green and a blue mana. You get a Frog Wizard. That's a 3/4 with reach. When Dream Dew Entrancer enters the battlefield, tap up to 1 target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If you control that creature, draw 2 cards. So Dream Dew Entrancer is potentially one of the most powerful cards in Standard, given the fact that we already know, based on the frogs from Bloomburrow, that the frog theme wants to bounce things back to your hand. I can see you playing Dream Dew Entrancer on turn 4, locking down your opponent's best creature. You bounce it back to your hand, and then replay it on turn 5 and do the same thing. And I think that's good enough in Standard for this to see play. And even if we don't have a dedicated frog deck, I think just the ability to go ahead and take out a creature for 3 turns is probably good enough for this to see play in Simic decks in Standard. Coming in at number 7, we have Phineas Ace Archer for a green and a white mana. You get a 2/2, that's a legendary creature, and is a rabbit archer. He has Vigilance and Reach, and whenever Phineas H. Archer attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control that's a token or a rabbit. Then, if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater, you get to draw a card. So, really nice card here. For 2 mana, you're getting, in essence, a creature that's going to, over the course of several turns, just keep growing your team as you play the game. And because of that, I think once you get into the mid game, if your opponent can't get rid of Phineas, you're just going to keep increasing the size of your team, and you'll be drawing a card every turn when he attacks, and that's more than enough to make this quality in Standard. And I think it fits into any token deck or any rabbit deck that we have in the format. And we know that rabbits are probably going to be a strong archetype in Bloomburrow Standard. Next, we've got Gev Scaled Scorch for a black and a red mana. You get a legendary creature that's a lizard mercenary and is a 3/2 with ward, pay 2 life. Other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life this turn. Whenever you cast a lizard spell, Gev Scaled Scorch deals 1 damage to target opponent. So this is basically on a body a crime that will be committed anytime you play a lizard spell. So we've already talked about the fact that we've got quality lizards in the format at the 1-drop spot, and we'll talk about one more in just a minute. But Gev, I think, is a really important enabler of the deck, because when this happens, you're going to be dealing damage to your opponent just by playing creatures, and then over the course of the game, with all of the other activations that we see among lizards, I think you're going to be able to scale the lizard deck accordingly. And in addition to that, I think you're going to be able to really pour on damage relatively early in the game. And I think that's good enough for a lizard deck to be solid in Standard. Next, at number 5, we've got 3 Tree City. It's a legendary land, and as 3 Tree City enters the battlefield, you get to choose a creature type. It taps for colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and choose a color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control of the chosen type. So this is a bonkers tribal land where it is going to enable you to go out and add 4, 5, 6, 7 mana in some cases to your mana pool and allow you to play a lot more stuff on a given turn. So I think this is easily playable in Standard, and it will also see play in tribal decks in older formats as well. So this is a card that is maybe the best overall card for Magic in general, and I'm rating it the number 5 card for Standard. Next, we've got Mura, Trash Tactician for 1, a red and a green mana. You get a legendary creature that's a raccoon warrior and is a 2/4. And at the beginning of your first main phase, add 1 red or green mana for each raccoon you control. Whenever you expend 4, you gain 3 life. And whenever you expend 8, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So Trash Tactician is a incredibly powerful mana generating card in the Gruul colors, and because of that, I think you can design a deck with really kind of top end creatures that don't even have to be raccoons, but your low end creatures are going to be raccoons because you're going to want to take advantage of Trash Tactician's ability to get you extra mana. And because of that, I think this is definitely going to see standard play. At number 3, we have another one of our lizards, and this one is Hearthborn Battler for 2 and a red mana. You get a 2/3. That's a lizard warlock with haste, and whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Hearthborn Battler deals 2 damage to target opponent. So already we've talked about the fact that a lot of the lizards have great activation abilities, and this is just another one. So if you play 2 spells on your turn, or your opponent plays 2 spells on their turn, then it does 2 damage to your opponent. So very much an upside card for you. And I can see this even going into the Prowess deck as a card that would see some play there, because you're going to be probably playing consistently 2 cards a turn, so that's going to deal 2 additional damage to your opponent. And that 2 to 4 to maybe 6 damage you would get over the course of a game from Hearthborn Battler, I think is enough to make this a very, very powerful card in Standard. And it might even be good enough for Pioneer, and possibly I'll see a little bit of Modern play. Next, at number 2, we have Emberheart Challenger for 1 and a red mana. You get a Mouse Warrior. That's a 2/2 with haste and prowess. It also has Valiant. Whenever Emberheart Challenger becomes a target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So Emberheart Challenger is, I think, immediately a card that goes into the current prowess decks as they're currently constructed, because you're going to be targeting Emberheart Challenger with spells, because that's one of the key points of the deck, and because of that, you're going to be able to exile that card and then play it that turn. So because of that, I think this is very easily going to see standard play, and might be, as we look back on this set, one of the best cards that we see from the set as a whole. And as we've seen throughout this preview video, red is getting a bunch of really quality creatures in this set, and I think that's really good, because that should slow down a little bit the control and mid-range decks that have been really dominating Standard for most of the last 6 months, and this should hopefully make those decks that want to play fast a little bit better, and hopefully slow down the mid-range and control decks that have been, for the most part, dominant of late. All right, coming in at number 1, we have Iridescent Vine Lasher for a black mana. You get a Lizard Assassin. That's a 1/2. And because he's Assassin, that makes him an outlaw, which gives him synergy with the cards from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. He also has Offspring of 2, and you may pay an additional 2 mana as you cast this spell. If you do, when this creature enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 token copy of it. It has landfall, and whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So this is a bonkers card, not only in Standard, but in Pioneer and in Modern, and potentially all the way back to Vintage and Legacy as well, because you can play this on turn 1. Turn 2, you're dealing an automatic damage to your opponent. You can attack at that point, or you can just leave it there on the battlefield, and it's going to chip damage your opponent and activate the crime ability on your turn when you play that land. And if you can get 2 copies of this down, because you're playing it in the mid to late game, you got extra mana, you play it for 3, and you get 2 copies of this, then every time you play a land, it's 2 damage that's going to happen to your opponent. So I think this is just a nuts card when it comes to Standard, when it comes to Pioneer, when it comes to Modern. And we're getting back Fabled Passage, so we're going to see the ability to activate Fabled Passage. It comes into play, you activate it, you get another land in play, and I think that is going to be something that's very important in Standard and in other formats as we move forward. All right, so that's our top 15 rares from the set. Tell me what you think. Leave a comment. Remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Bloomburrow spoiler season and beyond. And I've left a link to my top 10 mythic rares here, and I left you a link to get access to all the videos that were previews from the set. So thanks for staying to the end of the video, and I will see you in the next one.